Hello and welcome to a Lord Slar panel discussion, the first of Series 13, also known as Flux. And today I have two guests, unfortunately we're one short as somebody had to pull out last minute. But I do have here today Tharries of the Tharries YouTube channel.
It would be concerning if it was any other YouTube channel, wouldn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean...
It was like, here's studies of...
Well, it's the fact I know you quite well, and I still don't call you by your first name. I still call you Tharries. I'm going to meet you in real life.
Everyone does.
I'm going to meet you in real life next week, and I'm still going to call you Tharries. I hope you realise that.
Everyone does. Like, everyone I meet in real life is just like, it feels weird calling you Tom. You are Tharries.
Does your mum even call you Tom anymore?
No, my mum calls me Tom. That's
Hey.
a proper name, which you're getting all the law, but yeah, thank you for that glowing introduction, Dylan. Oh my god, no.
And humming the tank engine noise for us today is Genesis of Androzani, also known as Connor. I do actually call him by his first name.
There was a bed in the console room.
But they also said they were just friends. Right, so let's start talking about today's or yesterday's, from our perspective, episode, and talk about the Doctor, as we always start off talking about the Doctor in whichever episode we do. So, Tharries, we'd like to start. What do you think of Jodie Whittaker in this episode and the characterisation of the 13th Doctor?
Beyond, I felt that she was relatively the same as had been presented in the last few Chibnall stories, by which I'm going to be honest, in terms of this episode, she's kind of one of the weaker elements to it. Like, there's moments where she feels quite a bit more, I don't know, confident perhaps, which is a good thing, but largely I felt there's still way too much expositional dialogue. There's still a lot of moments that don't quite land. There was one or two here for me that did land, which is more than usual, to be fair. But overall, I felt it was relatively the same. Jodie didn't give a bad performance or anything, but I didn't notice a massive difference with her from this compared to, like, say, Series 12 or 11.
Yeah, Jodie Whittaker was definitely fine in the role. I didn't feel the role was still all that good. They still don't seem to really have a fully fleshed out character for this Doctor, at least nothing that I can particularly discern. And the one thing that Chris Chibnall obviously was trying to do with like the Time Children thing is kind of give this something more mysterious for Jodie Whittaker to do, but this is still doing exactly what happened in the New Year's special last year. This year. I suppose it's technically this year, where it's like kind of,
believe it or not.
Yeah, where basically like, you know, Jodie would have like a minute scene where she reflects on it, sort of, and then just go back to normal, which is unfortunately how a lot of the characters in the Chibnall era are, where they remember that they're supposed to be going through stuff for like a minute and then exposit about it, and then it doesn't really impact their actions later on.
Yeah. She also rolled her R's like Sylvester McCoy. Remember that at the start of the episode?
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
I didn't even notice.
Gotta love those references, huh?
Yeah, I mean,
I didn't even think on that.
But yeah, I have to agree.
I think one of my biggest like beefs with the way Chibnall writes characters is they talk a whole lot about what they're supposed to be going through, but they don't actually show it. And one of the worst things for me is that this, you know, really, I mean, I don't really, the whole like Timeless Child thing is silly, but one of the things that I would expect coming out of such a monumental revelation is for it to actually have an impact on the Doctor as a person. And like, you know, it should be I'd say quite a traumatic thing, you know, having that much history revealed, changing your whole life. And I find it odd that the way that she goes about it is just asking questions very blankly rather than actually kind of being affected. It's very just like, how much can you tell me about the division? You know, it's almost like she's just interested to know information, but there's no real weight to it. And I think that's very weird because this kind of revelation about her is a very big deal when you really look at like the context of the character. And I just think it's bizarre that the Doctor doesn't really give a shit.
Yeah,
outside
like
of wanting to know what it is.
she isn't like acting any more determined or any more unsure of herself or anything like that. There's just
Yeah.
occasionally she'll exposit some dialogue about how she's meant to be feeling, but none of it's really borne out in any action she's taking.
Yeah, I mean, because like, look at you know, like there's multiple examples of when the Doctor, when major events happen in their life, their whole attitude will it'll shift due to those events, and I think that it's just weird to me that something this major doesn't really change her, and it's a real waste of potential too, because Chibnall has thrown this huge event in the law's history into the whole thing, and hasn't actually used it to really develop the character at all, which is just kind of makes it seem really pointless, because it's just like, well, if you're going to go to that lengths to change everything, aren't you actually going to utilize that change to create some drama out of it? But it doesn't seem like that's the case. It just seems like she's the same old person she was, just has new questions to ask.
I
Yeah.
feel as though the messaging of the Timeless Child as a whole, though, is really confused, because in the Timeless Children itself, it's kind of reaffirmed to the Doctor by Ruth, who we still don't know whether she was actually there or whether she was a Matrix projection, whatever you want to say. It's kind of reaffirmed to her that this doesn't really change anything, but
Yeah.
later on in Revolution, she's still angry about it, and in Series 13, she's still looking for answers for it, despite being told that it doesn't matter. So it clearly does matter to her. So I'm just kind of wondering, which is it? Do you care about this
My
or
hunch
not?
is that whole scene in the Timeless Children was because that her Matrix somehow. So Chibnall thought of that as just like, oh, don't be affected by it. Just blast your
I
memories in
will
and
say,
get out. That's kind of how I saw it.
glad that in this episode they didn't just forget that any of that happened, because it is one of my pet peeves with it happens a lot in the Moffat era. It's one of my big issues. They introduce things, and then when the fans don't like it, they drop them instantly. I'm glad that didn't happen, but I want to see it actually affect things going forward.
Well, you see, I feel
yeah,
that
well,
the only reason I feel that this whole Timeless Children thing was kind of done so that you could kind of he could introduce things from the past to kind of from before the first Doctor to make them seem retroactively more important. So take this person who's doing the Flux. I don't think we've learned his name yet, but he's there,
Swarm,
and
isn't he? Isn't he referred
yeah,
to as
yes,
Swarm?
something like that. And it's just like if he wasn't from before the first Doctor, we wouldn't really care inherently that much about him unless he was a good character. Whereas now, well, it's naturally made interesting to fans because it's something that's very fundamental to the lore that we didn't know about, which I feel is quite a poor artificial way of.
But then even in there, it's like he goes to those lengths to rip something out from before our understanding of the history, to make it seem important, and yet the character doesn't even treat it like it is important.
It's really bad.
So it's like, what the fuck?
But I still don't think we can fully judge if that's the case till the end of the series. I suspect we're right, but I think let's reserve full and final judgment until it's all over.
Can I say this? I actually don't mind the Swarm.
We'll get onto that. We'll get onto that later, Tharries.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, so I think we'll finish about the Doctor here and move on to the companions, which obviously we have Yaz returning, as well as a new companion, Dan, the Plasterer. So would you like to go first, Connor? What did you think of the companions in this episode?
Okay, so I'll give brief thoughts on Yaz because I don't have as much to say about her as I do about Dan. But there's been this weird shift in her character since Ascension of the Cybermen. She's suddenly become a lot more confident. In fact, I would even say in some parts she reminds me a bit of Clara, which is a bit of a red flag. I mean, not to jump on the whole red flag thing, but just in general. But I don't know. There doesn't seem to be any real direction for why Yaz has ended up in this position, because it just seems like there's these just elements from previous characters that Chibnall is stitching into this person, and it doesn't. It's bizarre. I can't even describe it, but she has this really overconfident personality now, and she also has the sort of clashing with the Doctor of like, oh, you need to tell me this. You're hiding something. Blah blah blah. But and like, I know that some of us have been asking, or it'd be nice to see if Yaz actually had some conflict with the Doctor rather than just be obedient like the bloody fan were beforehand. But I just still think it's really just generic. Oh, what's the answer? Just being an audience advocate of like, oh, there's these questions that we don't know the answer to. Can you tell us? And then the Doctor's like, no, I'm not telling you anything. So I don't really have much to say about Yaz. She's just there. I think that.
I'll tell you what really annoyed me about Yaz in this story, which, as you just pointed out, is something that's really started to happen, is where she's kind of became really overconfident and controlling of situations. And I don't necessarily have a problem with a human companion becoming like that, but I need to see a clear series of events that develop the character to the point where they're confident in these stressful situations. They can use all this alien technology without a second thought. Whereas we haven't seen Yaz really do anything of note, or really much of note, since she's joined the TARDIS crew. Where did she get all this confidence from? It just seems like this is something that happened off screen, and all of a sudden she's doing it.
Can I present a counter to this?
Of course.
Just obviously, I'm not that it's like I don't want to like cut across anyone or anything. Try to be like all polite and stuff.
Oh no! If you think we're talking bullshit, call us out, because I'll do the same to you.
I don't think you're talking bullshit. I understand where your point of view's coming from, but as someone who kind of has had to have watched a lot of this era multiple times, just by the sheer virtue of, I guess, the sort of content that I make, I noticed with Yaz, there are moments throughout both Series 11 and 12 where she is presented as being very confident. One of the initial scenes in When We Fell to Earth has her basically settle a parking dispute within 30 seconds. Very quickly. There's also the bit in Timeless Children where she's the first one to go through that purple portal thing. So I'm not saying that the change in her character was, perfectly cohesive, or it wasn't something that I would say completely fits in, but I would say it fits in more so than perhaps I don't know some of the changes to Clara's personality. Just using that as a random example. That's just to me anyway, though. I feel free to disagree with
I'd say probably they're quite different situations. With Clara, you've got hard shifts of contradiction between back-to-back episodes. With something like this, it's more so I understand that yes, there's probably some kind of setup, and there are moments there where Chibnall's outlining where he wants this character to go and sort of traits that he's setting up. But what we're trying to say is that it doesn't really translate as a development, because there's no real journey, there's no real progression. It's just a bunch of things that happen sporadically across the series, and then she just ends up at the point where she's confident, but we don't really have there's no through line. And that's kind of where it gets lost on a lot of people.
I do see that. I do agree that hasn't really been enough.
Chibnall has this problem where he doesn't connect the dots together. He just puts the dots in and just leaves it, and I think that's a problem.
Oh, that's a really good way of putting it.
I do agree with you that there's not been enough of a journey to establish this new personality. I'm just saying that from what we've seen as Yaz, it's not impossible for me to believe that would happen eventually. Is what I was trying to.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm not saying she wasn't ever shown to have confidence, because obviously you talk about that kind of parking dispute, but I think it is important to remember there's a vast chasm of difference between being a trained police officer settling a parking dispute and basically having similar skills and attributes to the Doctor.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that.
And I don't really see, I haven't seen anything in the narrative or the experiences Yaz has had to suggest to me that all of a sudden she's capable of that, because it does feel sudden.
I think that it is all implied. You are right in so much as it doesn't happen on screen, but it is implied that they have spent a long time together since Ryan and Graham left. There's that line about taking to all these amazing after Ryan and Graham left.
I also noticed once Dan joins the TARDIS, she gets a bit dismissive of him. It's she doesn't want.
I quite liked that. I
Yeah.
actually quite liked that though, because I think I got really sick of in series 11 and 12 just the whole we all love each other, we're all best friends, everything is great. I quite
I
like
understand
here that
that.
they're setting things up for a bit of conflict, which I quite liked.
Well,
I
actually,
get that,
so
but
just
I also don't understand
go-
where it come from.
well, I think this is a good time to actually start talking about Dan, as we've kind of
Yes.
Yeah, go
set up
ahead.
piece about Yaz. Does anybody want to start?
Do you mind if I?
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
don't mind.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I really liked Dan. I'll be honest. I liked him more than I was expecting to. I don't know whether this is just a me thing, but personally for me, I find him the most relatable out of any Chibnall's companions so far. Like, I find that, despite Ryan and Yaz theoretically being closer to my age, Ryan's established to be like 19 in the first episode, despite looking about 20 to like 6 or however old Tosa Cole is. But like to me, there was just something so relatable about just a guy who doesn't really have a lot of money and doesn't really have much luck with relationships and things like that. And yeah, do I think it's all perfect? No, I think there are a few too many scenes where his character is exposited to us. Like there's that one scene where it's like, always late, Dan, and I'm like, it probably would be more effective to see him be late to something.
Although, let's be fair here, though. There was a lot more showing than telling than usual with Chibnall characters.
That's true.
Absolutely.
I think
appreciate that.
probably some of the best stuff with him was in his house when they were showing his situation where he lives and how he doesn't have much food in his cabinet and his fridge. I think that was a nice bit of show don't tell, which is refreshing for Chibnall.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think even just a little bit of that, there's still possibly maybe not quite enough for my taste. But I think that just the fact that there was just because there was some of it, has maybe much more well disposed to Dan than any of the previous companions so far.
I absolutely do.
I agree. Yeah.
I do agree on that. I still think Dan, in the grand scheme of things, is at this point is still just a very simple, bland, nice person character.
Yeah.
But I just think that it is a mild, step up in the sense that we did get a bit of show don't tell rather than just all of it being exposition. So I guess in that regard there is some level of improvement, but I still think there is that lack of dimension. Maybe with time we might see more of that, but for some reason I get the feeling with Flux and the whole structure of that we probably won't.
Yeah, I mean, we barely got to see any of Dan really in this episode for reasons that I will definitely be getting onto soon.
I think my biggest issue isn't really necessarily with Dan in isolation. It's more the fact that when something this simple and this just really, really small thing is often, like, it seems widely, a lot of people consider this to be like the highlight of this episode. I think that really says a lot about Chibnall's weakness as a writer, because I feel like something like Dan should be, an afterthought in the grand scheme of, the episode itself. So I think that really says a lot, and I think it's the reason why it's probably the most successful thing for a lot of people in this episode is because it's just so damn simple. Like there's not much about Dan that's actually that complicated. It's really just he's a nice guy from Liverpool who likes football. He's living with a little bit less income than he'd like, and he fancies that girl who also happens to have a disability, and that's it really. There's not much, and also he's somehow tied to the plot too, like the fucking, I don't know what the name of the character is, but he was.
Kashavan, was it?
Oh, Carvanista.
Oh, Carvanista. Oh, sorry. Chibnall aliens sound the same, man.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I don't know though with the point that I feel like Dan should be an afterthought. I don't know whether I necessarily agree with that.
I'm not saying he should be. I'm not saying he should be. I'm just saying that with if I look at what we're presented with Dan in this episode in isolation, if it was in, say, an era with, in my opinion, a better writer, I feel like that Dan side plot wouldn't be something that people will be raving about as the best thing from the story, if you know what I mean.
It wouldn't be the only bit of the story to get any kind of development or resolution. It would just be a part of a larger story.
That's kind of the point I'm making, is like, I feel like it is an issue that the thing that the people liked the most about it is that's the kind of thing I'm sort of saying, is that like
Fair enough.
the fact that the Dan stuff is the best stuff from the episode says a lot about it.
Something I will say about Dan that I really liked was that I felt, so I did like a whole thread talking about the companions and why so far for me this is like one of the stronger ones, is that I felt with the closest comparison we can draw to John Bishop's Dan is Bradley Walsh's Graham. Like, I think that's the closest parallel we can draw. You know, they're both older comedians who are coming into a role to kind of be the comic relief of the group. You know, at least that. So, you know, functionally they serve very similar purposes. Where I think that Dan excels, however, is that I felt with Bradley Walsh, Graham, I felt as though a lot of the reason people connected to Graham was less because Graham was a particularly interesting, or not interesting, but perhaps well-defined character, and more so just that Bradley Walsh was Bradley Walsh.
Yeah, I completely agree.
I felt with this, the way it was written, I felt the writing complemented the actor a bit more, and that's a hard thing to.
I definitely agree in the sense that with Bradley Walsh, there was a lot of the time where it felt like the show was like, look, it's Bradley Walsh, you like him.
Yeah, it is a bit of a low bar, but that has cleared it.
Like John Bishop's a known name, but he's not as like worldwide famous as Bradley Walsh is.
But I thought that like the main attraction to Dan wasn't, oh look, it's John Bishop. I thought the main attraction was, oh, he's
also,
actually.
The other thing I will say is like he also feels I mean, I guess this might actually be intentional because it's kind of the point, but he definitely felt like Dan's little storyline in this felt so disconnected from the rest of the story. It's almost like
everything in this story felt disconnected from the rest of the story.
Yeah, what I mean is that Dan it just feels like John Bishop has walked onto set and he's just ended up in the story and he's just like, oh, hello there.
Why did
you know,
like Shrek?
Like Shrek. Oh, hello there.
No, oh, hello there. No, it's no.
But yeah, he's. I mean, like again, like he's a nice guy, but for me personally, that's I don't really give a shit about nice people characters. I care more about like the dimension. Like if you look at, I think I made this comparison when I was talking to someone yesterday about this. Is like if you look at Terror of the Autons, you look at Jo Grant. She's also like Dan, a nice person, but there's so much more you can say about her. About her character, about the way she interacts with the Doctor and the Brigadier and Mike Yates and the Master, the fact that she tries really hard, she really wants to help, but she doesn't know what she's doing, so she makes mistakes and she gets blamed for it, but it's not really her fault because she just wants to help but doesn't know what she's doing. She's easily hypnotized and walks into trouble, but then in the end perseveres and actually helps. And it's like there's so much more dimension to just being a nice person, whereas with Dan, it's like he is a nice person, but he also doesn't really add much to the story.
I would argue, though, that there is more to Dan already than just being a nice person, by which I mean, like, it's kind of established that, like, he doesn't really like his trade. It's briefly spoken about that he has a trade and that he should stick to it. And, like, it's kind of shown that he has this passion for being, like, a tour guide.
I mean, I might be a bit harsh.
He really is passionate about, and like, but he can't do it. And he also, I think as well, something that really characterizes him is that he's offered food from a food bank, and he's like, no, there are people who need it more than that. To me communicates more than just he's nice. It communicates to me that he's selfless and perhaps thinks of himself as less important than others. You know,
I would be interested to see. I'd be interested to see in future episodes if they try and establish some, I guess, character flaws, because I feel like that's something that we didn't really get much of. Was, I guess, you know, you could say like, oh, he's a bit poor at the moment.
Well, I mean, he doesn't help them. He sometimes helps others too much at the expense of himself, I'd say, is the one flaw we've seen so far.
Yeah, I feel like that could be something interesting.
I feel like that's still more of a flaw than like half of them have had, though. So
I will be patient with. I'll be patient with Dan. We'll see where it goes, but I just we're not there yet, I'd say.
All right, so with that, we're going to move on to the next section. Now, this is a bit strange, because usually I can split them into plot and side characters, whereas I feel with this story, it's easier just to mesh them into one, as it's all a bit of a mess, at least in my opinion. But would anybody like to start and just talk about generally the flow of the episodes, the plot, the side characters, etc.?
I mean, where the fuck do we start?
Well,
There's so much shit in this.
Slightly different perspective to you two.
Yeah, okay, go on then. You go first, Tharries. No, you go first, Tharries, and then we can kind of give our take.
Don't get me wrong, I think that this had a lot of the hallmarks of some of my issues with Chibnall era scripts. It did have a lot going on at once, with a lot of different locations, and it did feel quite stuffed, for lack of a better term. I couldn't think of a better word to describe it. And I think, as I said, it also had like issues with exposition and stuff, but that's a separate point. But what I will say about this episode is I do think, hopefully, it will benefit from the structure which it is within, in terms of the fact that it's in a 6-episode, thing. So it has got plenty of time to expand on the things that have been established. I do agree with the criticism that perhaps, just saying, and this is a thing, is perhaps not the best way to do setup. However, for me personally, the way it was set up didn't negate the enjoyment I got from the episode. I don't know whether that's
let me explain my big issues, what I have with the setup. So with setup, obviously it's it can be quite a difficult art in terms of getting all the players in place for a story, especially one that, like this one, seems to be quite on a grand scale. But the important thing is to make sure that the audience is given a reason to care about what's being set up. So that means you do need to give some substance straight away. You do need to put in some reasons why this is something that's interesting, that the audience should care about. Some of the characters, why we should care about what's happening to them or why they're doing this, etc. So by introducing pretty much every player in the game at once and not really developing them in any way, maybe with the minor exception of Dan, was really detrimental, because basically just saying, oh, and now they're going to be involved later in the series, oh, and now they're going to be involved later in the series, oh, now they're going to be involved later in the series. And it's just like, well, if you're not a Doctor Who fan, you're just a general audience member, why should you give a fuck about any of this? Like, it's just a glorified trailer.
I do agree that this is almost wholly inaccessible to new audiences, especially with the references to like The Division and such.
I want to hone in on one specific scene from this episode, because I think it really defines probably one of the biggest issues I have with Chibnall, is that it's that scene in the Arctic where you've got that married couple and then one of them turns out to be one of the, I can't remember the names of the villains, but it's one of the villains. And it's just like, so they set it up as like, oh, there's this married couple at the Arctic, and they had this sort of conversation, and it's very similar to a lot of other married couples written by Chibnall. And he's, a lot of the time, he just sort of borrows cliches and whatnot. And it's like, why do I give a shit about this couple? Like, there's no build up, and then it's just like, oh, actually, the wife was one of the villains.
Really, that should be an episode in its own right, rather than just a reveal. Like, it doesn't work as a reveal if we don't care about the characters.
Like, it's so bare minimum, because it's just like, look, she was hiding in the Arctic. That's what it is, really.
That a lot of Chibnall scripts have, where occasionally people will feel less like people and more like plot devices.
Absolutely.
Like where they're 100%. In service of the plot and don't actually have their own real lives. You know what it almost gives me the vibe of? It almost gives me the vibes of like Sims characters, where they only really exist when you're like puppeting them deliberately to service whatever you want to do. That's kind of the vibe that like it gives me, and that is probably a good example from this episode.
Yeah, just all of it was kind of so undercooked and underdeveloped. It's just like, why should I care about any of this happening? I'm not given a reason to care. They're just things.
But just honing on that same scene again, which just outlines so many of the things, is that he's like, well, how are we going to make the audience believe that the husband didn't know that his wife was someone else? He's just a bit dumb. And that's it. That's all his character is. He's just a bit dumb. And I'm like, what is this? Like, what? This isn't.
I honestly mostly forgot about that scene, and I watched it today.
Exactly. Of course you forgot about it. Of course you forgot about it, because it was so dumb.
Hey, Tharries, did you remember that there was a scene about them mining in 1820s Liverpool?
Oh yeah, that.
You know what?
Can we say now that that's like the most pointless scene in this episode? Because it's probably going
I
to
mean,
factor
I
into
guess-
next
Yeah,
one.
how
I
you do
guess
setup
all
with
this-
things like this is you need to introduce things slowly. Like not too much at a time. Otherwise, it overwhelms an audience and nothing
you
is
need
really
to-
developed
you
to
need
be
to
inherently
pace things.
interesting.
What you need to do is you need to pace things in a way where, obviously, it's okay, absolutely fine to have all of these threads in this series. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But what you have to do is you have to give each one the time it needs to develop, so that once they all come together, you care about each and every single individual thread that's part of this
Yeah.
collection, I guess you could say. And when you just stuff them all in one episode and you don't give any reason to care about any of them, it just becomes this really undercooked mess. And I feel like people will enjoy it more because it has this high energy rather than because it actually has a developed
High
story.
energy is a really nice way of saying Chibnall's just jangling keys in front of your face for 50 minutes.
Exactly. I mean, I didn't want to use that word because it's so overused, but it's
I
true.
will say with the way it's paced and like the way it's setting things up, the comparison I made to a friend earlier was the reverse of MCU Phase 1. What I mean by that is, with MCU Phase 1, you had a bunch of solo movies to establish each character before the big event where you see them all together.
Yeah.
This feels like it's the reverse, where you've got the big event where you see all the characters together, and then in the following episodes, you're going to have individual things that establish each thing. But there's probably going to be an episode dedicated to the Weeping Angel lady. It's probably going to be an individual episode.
Yeah, but it's just
Some
really
Tharries
bad storytelling
doing
to have that all first. Because it basically just
Yeah,
wastes an episode. It's a waste of an episode, really.
Yeah, because imagine that. Imagine if, like, in Iron Man 1, you just had fucking Thor and Captain America and the Hulk and Hawkeye and Black Widow just all appear in the same film. It just wouldn't work. It would just be really messy and stupid. But, yeah, I just, oh my god, it just really frustrates me how Chibnall thinks for some reason, he's okay with having these characters that just aren't even people. They're just these really bare bones, like single trait caricatures of people. And it's just lazy, in my opinion. I just don't, because I feel like there are other examples you can look at where there are characters that only appear on screen for like a few minutes in other eras of the show, where they actually have, enough development for the scene to matter. But with a lot of Chibnall's characters, they don't. They're just these really, really simple one trait characters, wooden planks, and I just don't give a shit, personally.
Like Chibnall's one of his issues from the beginning is, I'm going to do everything in one episode. It's like, no.
I think
Why?
nothing epitomizes to me more why this is a problem than the Sontarans' appearance in this episode. Like,
Oh my god.
why did they need to be there? They didn't actually do anything other than say, we're Sontarans and we're going to be involved in this story. But it's like, that could happen in the next episode and we'd have some time to develop something in this episode.
I almost forgot about this. There was a scene with Vinda. Do you remember that?
Oh, I'd forgotten! I completely forgotten we'd been introduced to that character.
Yeah, they had a scene with Vinda as well.
And I'll say as
It
well.
felt like
Yeah, no, you go on. That's alright.
it just felt like, to me, like a 45-minute collection of advertisements for
Yeah.
what's upcoming.
Exactly.
I don't think that's how you should write stories.
No, that's not storytelling at all. Like, people are saying, "Ooh, well, it's just setup." Like, why are you hating on Chibnall for doing setup? But it's like, this is not how you do setup. This is the worst possible way of doing setup. It's not how... Have you ever heard of another TV show, film, or just any kind of media doing setup in this way?
Yeah, so it's like, okay, so when someone's going to ask me, like, okay, so the next episode is War of the Sontarans. So I'm going to assume that it's going to be focused more on the Sontaran side of the story, right?
Yeah.
So going into that episode, what do I know about the Sontarans that was set up in this episode? Not much.
That they're there,
Like,
essentially.
It's almost like if they didn't even appear in part one, it would be fine. It's not like there was anything I needed to even know about them before the second.
Same with
because there was
Vinda.
fuck all.
Like, what do we really learn about him?
Exactly.
To talk about that one scene very quickly, I don't know who I was talking to. I think I was talking to Trilby Reviews at the time. He said to me, that scene where Vinda's like, oh, and this is me signing on, I'm doing this. Oh, by the way, I hate you. It felt very scripted and very forced as well, that one scene. Yeah, now the more you guys have mentioned it, the more issues I've found with the way it's sort of paced.
Yeah.
So you,
Well, you know, that's
you
how,
are
that's
right
what we
in that
do.
regard. I still sort of, maybe it's bad. Is it bad? I'm in a very similar position to where I was with Spyfall Part One, and the reason I bring up that parallel is
Mhm.
because I feel like that sets up things that kind of, unlike Spy. Well, I guess both parts of Spyfall do this, where it sets up things, but like your continued enjoyment of those episodes as individual things is very reliant on, okay, where does this go next?
Yeah. So
And
this is called this is what I would call a hard hook, is that it's something that happens a lot in modern TV where it will you will enjoy what a lot of people will enjoy watching it because they will see potential in what's set up, and so it like I said before, it has a high energy, so it's stimulating for the brain, but then also because it's all set up, it starts getting you thinking. It's like, oh, what could that be? What could that be? What could that be? And so it's quite exciting to think about when there's all this setup. But I think what is damaging is that once you get the full 6 parts, and obviously I could be wrong, this could succeed, it is possible, but if you get to the end of the 6 parts, like you did with Series 12 and the Timeless Children and all that, and you look back and realize, wow, all that setup was meaningless, that's when you realize that you've been manipulated by the writer, because what they're doing is they're just getting you to keep watching. And I think that that's a really toxic way of writing TVs, because you have this formula that works that will get people to enjoy your TV, but it's not actually something that's going to benefit the story long term. It's something that's very short term.
Yeah,
I
definitely.
I do see your point there.
And because I've been through this situation so many times with so many shows,
Doctor Who a lot.
I can see bullshit. I can see bullshit before it happens, so that's why I don't enjoy this style.
At the moment, I'm still quite warm on it, but that might just be. I gotta be honest, like I'm known for being negative, I guess, but like I quite enjoyed the capacity. I quite enjoyed the fact that I did somewhat enjoy what this established. Yeah, it's a bit of a mess, but like there were parts of this that I did like, and I feel as though maybe I'm going soft in my, well, not old age, but like I guess in the few years I've been doing this regularly, maybe because I know like RTD's coming back, I'm just like, you know what, go for it. Seriously, just do you? You know what I mean? Like, I just get worked up enough to be like.
I just really hate
I don't know.
TV that's done like this, and storytelling that's done like this, where it's kind of, not really about the substance or the storytelling. It's just about teasing things that are going to happen. It's a really, really horrible, and as Connor rightly pointed out, manipulative style of television that doesn't really have anything inherently meaningful about it. And, it can work for some people as like a kind of one-off thing to kind of, as that kind of hard hook, but really, it's not going to age well. I mean, even if the rest of the series is really good, this is still not going to age well as an episode, because it doesn't really tell you anything about what we're going to see later.
And here's the thing, Tharries, I'm not judging you or anyone for enjoying this. That's not what I'm saying. I think it's absolutely fine to enjoy this style of TV, but I'm just warning you. I'm just warning you that you may be very disappointed by the results because of the kind of reputation that this has.
I completely agree with everything you guys have said. I think it's just, in a weird way, I enjoyed it regardless, and it's one of those.
That's fine.
Well, I mean, here's the thing. It's like enjoyment is kind of obviously it's intrinsically tied, but in some ways it's kind of a separate variable to the actual storytelling. Because, for example, like I also had a good time watching it, but that doesn't mean I thought it was good. I just enjoyed taking the piss out of it, which is a way of enjoying it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like some people need to separate what they enjoy and also what they think, what they got out of it in terms of the actual story, because they are in some ways different. Like you can watch. I mean, I guess the best example that I can think of something that people really enjoy watching that isn't very good is The Room, because it's so bad that people love watching it together because it's got this meme quality to it. And obviously that's an extreme example, but it really highlights the fact that it's like when, for example, when I criticize something like this episode, it's not me saying that I think your enjoyment of it is a mistake
Really
or
not, no.
you're wrong or anything. It's
I
just me
don't
saying
think
that
I
I
don't
think that
you think
this kind of storytelling is something that is geared to hook you, but in the end, it won't actually satisfy the
And
whole
you know
series.
what?
I think
You
the
are
storytelling won't work.
probably right. I think it's interesting because I think that's why it's probably interesting to have me on this, because I'm sort of, I guess, like the hook worked on me. I hate that I'm invested.
I get
Well,
that.
well, we were going to have another person who was more positive as well, but as I said, they dropped out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like
Well, I know that feeling because I've had this before. Like, when I first watched Fugitive of the Jadoon, I was like you. I was also hooked by all the setup. But then once I got to the Timeless Children, I looked back on it. I was like, actually, that was not really a story, was it? It was more just.
I was right about Fugitive from the start, by the way.
I will say, conversely, I instantly thought this is just a Moffat setup episode, but like, with a bit more nostalgia stuff. So I think the difference with this, I guess, the reason it didn't raise so many alarm bells in my head was, I think, perhaps because it was like a different format. Like it almost gave almost an excuse to be like, okay, it may be oddly paced now, but maybe
I get
it'll
what you're
get
saying,
fixed
yeah, because the
later
format
on.
is different.
But it's not
The
like
format
Doctor
is
Who's
different, and, like,
never done a serial before,
actually-
though.
No, I
actually,
know
one
that.
thing-
I mean, like,
one thing is,
for New Who though, it is a relatively.
One thing I will say in your favor slightly is that we know for a fact that War of the Sontarans is to some degree a follow-up to this episode, whereas something like Praxeus was not at all a follow-up to Fugitive.
Yeah,
Doom. In fact,
true.
it was the opposite.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like
Yeah.
the thing is,
I
with,
get what you're saying about the format. The format
Yeah.
is something that is like, it is interesting because it will be like, well, is there actually going to be a cohesive follow-up? I have my doubts, but we'll see what happens.
Well, I mean, if there's the one thing that we know is that there's not going to be another episode like this in the series, thankfully. But this was really poor setup, in my view.
It was. It was poor setup, and the thing is, I don't disagree with anything you guys have said. Like that's the thing. I can acknowledge that it was kind of poorly paced. There was a bit too much expositional dialogue. There were some lines and scenes that didn't really work. But at the same time, like for me personally, I enjoyed it, and I think that's an important separation. Like to acknowledge when things don't quite work, but then also be able to enjoy it. In a weird way, I kind of feel similarly towards. I mean, not completely. It's a different thing, but like with the TV movie, we all acknowledge the TV movie has its massive flaws. But I can't help but really enjoy myself watching the movie.
Yeah, I get
that's kind of how I feel about
Well,
this.
I kind of get what you mean, because, like, for example, the Keys of Marinus, I recognise that as a story and a piece of television, it's an absolute car crash from start to finish, from the scripting, from the sets, from the directing. Like, it's all just a complete car crash, but I love it to bits, just because I enjoy all of the bizarre, insane things it keeps on throwing at me. Like all of these ideas,
with,
and it's just like, but I don't know. In that one, I can kind of forgive it
I'm the same
more.
with like something like Fear.
Yeah.
I'm the same with something like Fear, where it's like it's absolute shit on a stick, but it's so much fun for me to watch because it's just so insanely weird.
I agree with that. I actually do enjoy watching Fear. I mean, I think Fear is one of the worst episodes of Doctor Who, but I also love watching it.
Yeah, well, you got these grown adults standing in a circle, and the Doctor's telling them to put their fingers on their lips. It's so funny.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I feel that we should move on now. So we're gonna just before we wrap up, we're just gonna talk about the effects, the directing, the visuals, etc. So I think it's always good to touch upon that. Who wants to go first?
I'll do it.
Yeah, all right, go on, Connor.
Yeah, you go first.
Okay, so here's the thing about the effects. I feel like there is some kind of duality to what I would say is that it is very impressive. It's like when you go to a gym and you see, a bodybuilder lift this really heavy weight. But the problem is that it's kind of, for the BBC standard, it's like a technical sort of achievement. But I I feel like outside of maybe a couple of moments, I did like the bit where they went into like Jodie Whittaker's
Yeah,
apartment
that
and
was
it
the bit
turned
that really
into the
stood out to
Flux
me.
thing. That was quite cool. There was a couple of other neat little moments because I do think that Jamie Magnus Stone is very good at visualizing stories, but I've always thought this. I've always thought the Chibnall era is very processed and artificial looking, and it has too many lens flares and it has too much flash, and it's not actually organic and it's not artistic. It's not natural, and it has this issue where you also have to bounce between this really sort of gray Sunday night drama and this really like flashy, oversaturated rainbow sci-fi show, and it doesn't feel natural, and it doesn't actually have this like really artistic flair. It's just so corporate and produced, and it's just too much. And I don't personally enjoy the way that the Chibnall era looks, and I feel like this episode had a lot of similarities to things that I've seen before from Chibnall Who in terms of like the CGI effects and the direction and everything. It was just so processed.
Yeah, I
and
agree.
actually there was one shot in particular that was quite bad. It was the one where it zoomed in on I don't know if it's a museum, but that drone shot.
Yeah, it like lagged.
That looked terrible.
It like lagged. It looked like it was lagging for a moment. That was weird. Some people pointed that out.
Awful. But yeah, no, it's like it's really hard for me to talk about the direction in this because it's not like it feels like there's these industry standards that are put around all these episodes, but it just doesn't have that really organic, artistic flair that something like a Rachel Talalay episode has, if you know what I mean. Like, because that's got a very similar technical level of excellence to it, but it's so much more meaningful and it's so much more impactful, whereas this is just sort of, hey, look, bright lights, there's a space cancer CGI, there's force fields, there's big laser guns, there's the bright TARDIS colors. It's just, and I just don't like it personally. It's just not my thing.
I think for me, it's like I'm kind of just not over that this is the visual, not the visual, like the visual style that they want to go for. But I guess it's more so like this is the best that particular style has looked, even though it's not a style I'm overly keen on. Like you said, I'm not a big fan of like a million lens flares per episode. And stuff like that. I will say, I think the color grading in this was slightly better than Series 12. Like, Series 12, like, it looked like they turned the saturation up way too high. I preferred the color grading here than Series 12. I'll say as well, like, I just want to say again, the CG shots, some of the CG, like, spaceship shots, I genuinely thought looked, like, really good. Like, I think we have to
really
give that...
impressive.
I know it is quite a, you could argue it's quite a surface level thing, but ultimately that did take work and effort, and you've got to praise stuff where it is warranted. And I believe like the TARDIS looks wonderful in this. Like there's a shot that I really do like where the TARDIS is like whipping between like multiple different planets as the Flux is coming towards it, and I love that because the show's never really had the budget to sort of show the TARDIS moving that quickly, and it actually looked good. So I almost quite liked how sort of frantic the TARDIS movements were, and like that one shot as well where the TARDIS is like sort of hurtling away from the Flux, and it's kind of, you see the rear end of the TARDIS, is the only way I can describe it, and it's like spinning around. I thought the TARDIS looked wonderful in this, and then there's the shot as well where they're stood outside the TARDIS and there's the shot of space. I thought that looked really good.
I can imagine a lot of the shots from this episode appearing in sort of tribute compilations on YouTube, if you know what I mean. Where people are like do like musical compilation tributes of the show and the character, and they show shots from this of like the TARDIS flying through space. I can imagine that, but I just don't think that it adds spectacle to the story, but it doesn't add much to the narrative. Just like you get that whole scene with Vinda. The whole point of it was just look at space. Isn't space beautiful? And it's, I don't think it has much substance to it. I think it's just a stylish, impressive bit of effects and cinematography, really.
Yeah, I suppose that's true.
Praise that. Where I think there is merit in that in itself.
Yeah, I agree with both of you. Faris is right to really praise the kind of the standard, but I do agree that perhaps a more a director or just like maybe a style with a bit more artistic flair could help add to the narrative
Yeah.
rather than
I
just
I
be
am
there
interested in
to.
what
one of the
someone
reasons
like
why it's one of the reasons
I-
why I'm quite happy about Series 14 being done by Bad Wolf Productions rather than the BBC is because they have a reputation of being very artistic, which is a lot
That's
more
good.
the kind of thing that I'm interested in seeing.
I will say I would love to see someone like a Rachel Talalay with the access to this kind of CGI, like on a
Yeah.
Doctor Who episode. It would be, I imagine, something
Yeah,
really
because
special.
it's like
Um,
you look at because like with something like Death in Heaven, those flying Cybermen, like the CGI just doesn't look very good.
yeah,
Despite the fact that Rachel Talalay is a very strong director in terms of shot composition and lighting.
yeah.
Although to be fair, there's a bit of lighting she does in some of her episodes that's a bit off. But anyway, yeah,
Talking
Yeah.
I think that it's very impressive to see Doctor Who done like this. But I think also there was one other thing I wanted to say is that I noticed a lot of the inspiration behind these shots are homogenized from like famous Hollywood films. Like you got that scene with all the ships all lining up as like it's almost exactly the same as that scene from Guardians of the Galaxy near the end of
Yeah.
that film. And then you've also got
I
like
also weirdly got a Rise of Skywalker vibe from it.
oh,
Like, they were all-
absolutely, yeah. This
Yeah,
whole like the whole trailer for this series gave me a very Rise of Skywalker vibe. I was like, wow, this it's just so it's just this bit thing of when they're trying to be like, look how big it is, look how many of them there are, where it's like I personally that doesn't do much for me. Like, I don't really see the value in that. I care more about the like I don't care about the fact that there's a million ships. I would care more about like who are the people that are flying the ships, what personalities do they have, what stakes do they have in this fight, that's what I care about, as
All
opposed
right.
to the fact that there's so many of them.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up there. That was a sort of very interesting conversation, but we are over the time I thought we were going to spend on this video. So we're just going to quickly wrap up with some closing thoughts. Do you want to start, Faris?
Yeah, I'll start. So I guess overall, I enjoyed it for what it was. I still acknowledge its issues. I agree with a lot of the issues presented, and even some of the ones I said myself. I'm fully aware that that it's probably going to crash and burn at some stage. It kind of did the most evil thing it could do, which was make me invested. Because I don't know whether I can go through the pain again. But I'll say like one thing I want to say really quickly, which we didn't cover in like the visual and stuff segment. I thought Sagan's music was stronger in this one. Weirdly, I don't know whether anyone else thought that, but like his final composition for the ending scene, I thought was quite good. But yeah, overall enjoyed it. Still had a lot of issues, things to be ironed out. Thought the characters were stronger, but so yeah, basically, not perfect, but better, but still not perfect. I don't know. There you go.
All right, Connor.
I didn't like it. It was an advertisement. It was overstuffed. It had terrible dialogue. It had terrible exposition. It had pointless characters. It was flashy but not interesting. No. I guess Dan was okay, but I want more. I want more than just just what we got. I want there to be more dimension. I'm scared that we won't. I did actually, like with a lot of Chibnall Who, I did cringe a lot at the attempted comedy.
Yes,
that was something I really didn't like. And yeah, this definitely. I mean, we didn't even talk about the bloody Weeping Angels. That was in it as well.
it was another throwaway moment.
Show, like,
I thought that looked weirdly cheap actually, because the Weeping Angel doesn't change
so much
position
there,
at any point.
and I just get the feeling that all of this like setup and this tied together, it feels more like in the end. I'm just going to make a prediction. It feels more like in the end it's going to be like, see, look, I really did tie this together, but there's not going to be actually anything that comes out of it, and that's the real big thing for me. Is that I feel like with Chibnall is that he wants to have this big story, but the actual big story doesn't actually give you much in that, if you know what I mean. You don't get much that comes from the fact that it was a big story. You don't get this sort of payoff, and I'm pretty convinced that it's just going to be a style over substance, really, big scale timey-wimey series arc with a big, universe-ending stakes, and it's not going to really develop the characters too much, and it's just going to be crap. So yeah, sorry, didn't like it.
Right. So for me, I thought this was a very, very poor episode, and it's not like there was anything, it's not like a lot of the other episodes I call bad, where there's lots of different things. And like here, there's just one central thing. It's the fact that it's all set up, and it's a really poor way of doing setup. It almost feels as if Chibnall just decided, right, episode 1 is just going to be set up, and then I'm going to do all my stories in the next 5 episodes. But to me, that's just a complete waste of an episode, and not how you do setup in a way that's actually interesting. Because in setup, I need to feel like there's a reason for me to be interested in the characters and concepts introduced. They need to be developed and explained as you go. And so, really, in this kind of serialized format,
you remember them.
Yeah, it taking advantage of the serialized format, introduce them slowly over time. You have the time to do that now. You have 6 episodes. You don't have to introduce everything at once. You can go slowly. Just start with, maybe in this episode, with a couple of the elements, maybe 3 of your being really ambitious. You don't need to throw this much at the wall at once, and as such, it doesn't matter how good the rest of the series is, this is still really poor. A lot of people have been saying, oh, you can only really judge this episode with the full context. Well, I disagree, because this is very clearly the setup episode, and this is bad setup. And even if the rest of the series is great, I'm still going to think this was a shit episode. And if the rest of the series is great, when I come back and rewatch the series, I won't be rewatching this one, I'll just be rewatching the rest, because this one doesn't say anything other than what's here. And after you know what's in the series, there's really no point or substance to it whatsoever.
In this episode, you're probably not gonna forget them. Like, you don't really need to rewatch this one, do you?
No, not at all. Right, so thank you very much for coming on, Tharries and Connor.
That's all right.
Yeah, it's all right.
Yeah, and I'll see you back next time with Flux episode 2, which hopefully has a very strong chance of being better, because there's no way they're doing this style of episode a second time, because they've already done the setup, but thank God that's out of the way.
Well, you never know, Dylan. You never know.
Oh, please no. See you next week. Bye.